Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for stopping by during one of your busy days at the beginning of the school year. I'm pretty pumped to have a special guest here today. Well, actually, two special guests. I'm going to introduce to you Chef Tim England, who is a certified executive chef and alumni of this program. He currently is at Beacon Hill Estates at Eastgate, and so he is doing his thing there. He's a really big advocate for farm-to-table food, and he actually has a huge garden in the back of the estates, which he uses to cook food for the residents there. So I want to introduce Chef Tim England, and he will introduce our special guest, Chef Rick Bayless.
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I want to tell you that it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here and to represent this program. I was telling his assistant over on the side, my class was the class that did the groundbreaking for this building before it was built. And it's ironic that we're here to talk about farm to table and things, where this building, about where the kitchen sits, was our original herb garden. So we held the groundbreaking ceremony. I still remember it like it was yesterday because we were getting swarmed by bees that wouldn't leave us alone that day. Mm-hmm. But to know that this program lives on, for me, I've never not been connected to the program for the past 30 years, over 30 years, because I graduated in '86. Imagine then I was the fifth class to graduate from the program. But this isn't all about me today by any means. And I want you to know you're in for a real treat because I've had the distinct honor and joy to be able to spend the morning with Chef Bayless, both in the garden and dining today for lunch, and then also in a panel discussion that we had there at Beacon Hill. And this man is a man among men when it comes to culinary arts. He really truly is. And what I've learned today and what I've seen and experienced firsthand by being beside him and being able to engage in conversation with him and along with my staff, you as a student body are really in for a really great educational opportunity in a moment in your career that not many chefs get to have this one-on-one. So without further ado, it's my distinct honor to introduce Chef Rick Bayless.
Thank you. What are we talking about?
Questions. Do we want to talk about food? Or we want to just...
Can Chef talk about...
Sure. Testing. Yeah, testing. Yeah, I guess it's on. It doesn't sound like it's really carrying. If somebody's having trouble hearing me, then please raise your hand and we'll see if we can fix it. I think he just turned it up a little bit. Okay, so my background is a little circuitous. I didn't just say, oh, I want to go to culinary school, and went to culinary school and then graduated and did what I'm doing. I came at it from a very different perspective. And the one thing that we have to keep in mind that back when I was getting started, there were very few culinary schools out there to even go to. So there was the Culinary Institute of America. There were a bunch of trade schools where culinary was taught along with air conditioning, repair, automotive, and all that sort of stuff that was taught on the same level like that. And I grew up in a barbecue restaurant in Oklahoma City. And a lot of times when people think about barbecue, because in our culture it's like folk food, it's not like anything that people treat seriously, like you don't say barbecue cuisine. Those two words sort of don't typically go in people's minds. But obviously, if you follow anything that has to do with barbecue, you know that barbecue is a major art and that people that do it are very passionate about it. And no, they probably don't come out of culinary schools, or most of them don't come out of culinary schools. They come up through more of what we would call an apprenticeship program, or they come up through just this passion for cooking barbecue. Interestingly enough, my father, I come from a family that was all in the grocery business, and my great-grandparents were the first to start a chain of grocery stores in Oklahoma. And the next generation followed suit with the grocery stores, and then my mother's generation ended up in restaurants, sort of following suit for what my father did. And he was not a restaurant person at all and wasn't really a cook, but he figured out how to do this thing, and it was successful in a restaurant that was there for 37 years. But what I learned growing up in the restaurant business was two things. One was my passion for food, that I just loved being there. I loved the physicality of it. I loved the dailiness of it. And since I'm talking to a bunch of people that are getting started in culinary career here, I will say, if you don't like the dailiness of it or the physicality of it, it's probably not the right kind of profession for you. Those of us that can't sit still, that really like to be moving all the time, are perfect for the restaurant business because you're constantly moving. If you can say, I can stand on my feet for 10 hours and do and cook and lose track of time, then it's the right thing for you. But you also have to be into the dailiness of it, because it's like you can't get up in the morning and go, oh, you know what, I don't feel like cooking today, because those guests are going to come into the restaurant and they're going to need to be fed, and it doesn't matter what you feel like, but you still have to go and do the dailiness of it. So somebody asked me at a panel discussion the other day, what was the thing that I liked the most about the restaurant business and the least about the restaurant business? And I said, it's the same thing. It's the dailiness of it. Because there are days when you just think, really? I have to go and do this again today? And then there are days when you think, oh my God, I can't wait to get to work. This is just like, I'm so into what I'm doing. And I say that after many, many years, but I like those things about the restaurant business, and I knew that growing up. But I knew I also didn't want to inherit my parents' restaurant. I didn't have passion for the kind of food that we do there, but I learned something really critical about it. Well, actually, I learned a lot of things that still to this very day stand me in great stead. One thing that I learned, which kind of comes back to this farm to table thing, that when I was growing up, my father took me to this market where we bought the stuff for our restaurant. And I didn't know what that was, but it was a commercial farmers market. And all these farmers would come in twice a week, and we would go down there and buy the stuff. And if I look back on it now, it makes perfect sense to me, because what did we serve in our restaurant? We served beans, we served coleslaw made from cabbage, which can be harvested at one part of the year and then held for months and months. We did things with eggs, we did things with potatoes, potato salad and such like that. So all of this stuff was like locally grown there where I grew up, but I didn't know that we were going to like a commercial farmers markets. I didn't even know that they could exist, but that's what I grew up with. Second thing that I grew up with was the fact that every single thing in my parents' restaurant was made from scratch. And even though it was started in the 50s, so after World War II, everything changed in food in our country. And though none of you is even close to old enough to remember all of that, that people used to, before World War II, grow organically, because that's the way they grew, and we didn't have all the chemically derived pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers, and food was not trucked around so much. There were a few things that were sent in, but they weren't very many. So people were really basically eating seasonally and locally and organically, because that's kind of the way people did things. They didn't know that that's what they were doing, but that was the way life was. And if you think about food in general, that's the way the human race has eaten for eons. It's only like in the last 60 or 70 years that we've changed those things. So we have to kind of keep all of that in mind. So my parents' restaurant did everything from scratch. And I grew up in a scratch restaurant. We didn't buy anything made. When you cooked the beans, you put the pot of beans on, you went through the beans and you cooked them, and then you had your beans. So it was that kind of cuisine that I grew up on. But the most important lesson that I learned in the restaurant growing up was sense of respect for tradition. Because when you work in barbecue, no matter where you work in barbecue, it is the local food. and it is what the community thinks of as their food. So in Oklahoma, since probably none of you knows what Oklahoma barbecue is, it's got aspects of the famous Kansas City barbecue, meaning that it's based heavily on ribs, and it's got a lot of elements of Texas barbecue, which means it's dry rub, set for a long time, and then cooked slowly, and sauce is always served on the side. Not that that should mean anything to any of you, but that was the tradition that I was raised in. And what I was able to absorb from that was that people identify with their food. And you just think about where we are in the United States. If I ask you to say, what are the great regional cuisines of the United States? Great regional cuisines. Okay, well, maybe some of you will say New Orleans, okay, because that's our sort of shining example, because they have a real cuisine and you can think about what they do there. They're super proud of it. It goes back generations, and it's complex enough to call it like a real cuisine because it's quite varied. The cuisine of the American Southwest is getting smaller and smaller all the time because fewer and fewer people are making it, and people in the American Southwest are starting to eat like people do here in Michigan, you know? You think about Midwestern cuisine. What are the classic dishes of Midwestern cuisine? Most people are hard-pressed to even say what they are. Is it, I don't know, tuna noodle casserole? I don't know. Is it what is it? Is it meatloaf? No, but meatloaf is everybody's favorite thing everywhere in the United States. So you can see how in the last half century or so, we've kind of eroded what local cuisines are in the United States. But barbecue is still sort of holding on, and we have the regional barbecues, and people still, when they want to do, in places that are known for barbecue, if they want to do a kind of local thing, they'll think about having a barbecue. And so part of the restaurant that I grew up in was this catering division, simple catering. Basically, you go and you set up a buffet and you put the food out there and the people help themselves. And we'd serve them iced tea. We didn't have a liquor license, so we would just serve like iced tea to everybody. And then that was kind of it. But so my father died when I was in high school, and I, as a high schooler, took over the catering business. And so that was what I did all through high school and college, was to go and set up these buffets. But what I learned about it was this great sense of pride that we made all of our food from scratch. Everything that we did represented what the local cuisine was all about. So when I fell in love with Mexico, which sort of happened when I started when I was 14, I could recognize when I would go to these different villages in Mexico, and they were so incredibly proud of their cuisine. So Mexico is it has been, it's sort of, that's eroding too, but it has been hyper-local, where I would read about a regional specialty, say in a guidebook. I'd read somebody mention a local specialty, so I would go into the area and I would ask for that local specialty. And people would laugh and they would go, oh God, we never make that. That's not our food. No, you have to go 5 miles down the road here, and that's the town that makes that, but we would never touch that dish. So when I say hyper-local, I mean hyper-local, that people would associate a dish with even just one little village. And at certain times of year they would make it and all that. So it was not only just a bunch of regional cuisines in Mexico that I could relate to, but also a sense that at certain times of year they would make certain things and never any other time. So of course we now in the United States have the pumpkin spice latte season, and that's what everybody thinks about. That defines one whole section of our year. Used to, we would say, oh, you know, it was like from basically between Thanksgiving and New Year's, we would think about all these certain flavors we associate with the holidays, but now that's been elongated because of pumpkin spice latte. I think we're getting ready to start it pretty soon, and that's when it's all gonna like come together. But I fell in love with Mexico because I found that the cuisine there, well, the people there, I'm going to start with the people because that's what I fell in love with first. The people there were so generous. They were just so open. they were, the sense of hospitality was something that I had never experienced in my life. And I grew up in a very hospitable family, and in a world that I thought was pretty hospitable, but it was nothing like what I encountered in Mexico, where people were just so open. And then the other thing that I learned there, and it's something that is really hard for us to get into in the United States, because our whole culture is kind of built in a different way, but they are so into defining the life in terms of time, moments. And moments, for them, the whole notion of time is so elastic. And the whole idea that you could spend 2 months making a candle that's going to burn away in one festival, and everybody just stands there and appreciates the fact that you spent the last 2 months making this candle, and isn't it wonderful that we're going to burn it at this one moment. They love ephemeral art. And I will say to you, and this may just go straight over most of your heads, but I'm going to just plant the seed because it may come back to you. What you do as a cook is ephemeral art, because you are creating something, and you may spend all day making a dish, and then somebody consumes it and it's gone. But the only way they can enjoy that dish is to consume it. So it's this double-edged sword. You would love them to somehow shellac it and hang it on their wall and just think what a wonderful cook you are, but they can't enjoy it. They can't fully take in what you've created unless they actually consume it and it goes away. So that's ephemeral art, and you have to love that thing. And I fell in love with that aspect of Mexican culture. So generosity, the sense of love for the moment, and that being in that moment is one of the most important things. We tend to, in our culture, rush from one thing to another. I say, so when I was growing up, before the last present was unwrapped at my house growing up at Christmas time, my mother was already taking the ornaments off the tree. And she was moving from one thing to the next. And it was like, just slow down and just savor the moment, okay? So I learned a lot about that in Mexico, but I also learned how that a culture really does reflect, a cuisine really does reflect the people that created it. And it reflects their history, their geography, where that culture is, their ethnicities, where they've come from, perhaps. And all of that is right on the plate if you just stop to think about it and decode it. Okay, so this is one of my favorite things to do, is to take groups to Mexico. And usually groups of chefs from our restaurant, and I'll take them down there. And we'll have a plate of food in front of us, and I'll say, okay, let's just decode the plate. Okay, why is this element on the plate? Where does that come from? And it's like, oh, okay, well, the first Spaniards that came, they were almost all very influenced by North Africa, because Spain had been under the rule of the Arabs of North Africa for over 7 centuries. 7 centuries. That's a long time to be under somebody else's rule. And so all these elements of what we think of as Middle Eastern or Arabic cuisine were all brought by the initial Spaniards. They came over because, remember that Columbus came in 1492, right? 1492 was the year that the Europeans took over that peninsula, which is Spain now. It was not just until that time. So these people had been living under this sort of what they called the Moorish domination. So you see a lot of elements of that. Take some of the desserts that you see in Mexico. They're small and intensely sweet. Doesn't that describe most sort of Middle Eastern desserts? They use a lot of sugar syrups that are infused with other flavors. Doesn't that just describe those sweets of the Middle East? So you find a lot of that. If the more you know about people and their heritage, the more you can decode that same stuff on the plates. Mole is one of the great Mexican dishes, okay? And everybody would say that it is the dish that defines Mexican cuisine. It's made for all the special occasions. Families have their own recipes for it. It's passed down from generation to generation. Each household can be slightly different, but each region, there are some similarities in that region. So you can go to Oaxaca, the land of the seven moles, and you'll find that every house can make the seven moles, or most of the seven moles, and they'll all be sort of similar, but sort of have their own individual stamp as well. But if you look at the classic mole recipe, the one that most people would talk about is mole poblano, because it's the one that was supposedly invented at a certain moment in time. Dishes rarely get invented, just so you know. Yeah, the molten chocolate cake can be sort of taken back to one particular chef. But most dishes that are adopted by a whole group of people, a whole culture, usually are developed over a long period of time. But so let's take mole poblano. What most people think about, even people that grew up in Mexico, is that mole poblano is one of the great ancient traditions of Mexico, that it goes way back into pre-Columbian times. Totally false. It's totally false. 50% of the ingredients in mole poblano did not exist in Mexico before the Spaniards arrived. 50%. And it is a sauce that is primarily thickened with nuts, seeds, corn, or bread. That describes a whole class of sauces that come from Spain. And so, like, you could look at it and you go, well, half of the ingredients were brought into Mexico and half are indigenous to Mexico. The way you cook down the chilies, totally Mexican. No place else in the world does that. They did that in pre-Columbian times. So that's a tradition and a technique that is adopted into it from that side. And then you thicken it with bread and nuts and seeds, and it's like, well, that's a very Spanish thing to do. So it's like where these two things come together and they create this absolutely brilliant dish. Somebody asked me earlier today, what's with all those ingredients in mole poblano? Because most recipes will have north of 20 ingredients in it. The one that we make's got like 27 ingredients in our restaurant. And you go, why the hell do you need 27 ingredients to make a dish? What if you just took half of those things out? What would you have? Well, you wouldn't have mole. So this is an interesting story about history here. Let's talk about that Arab influence in the cuisine of Mexico. The one thing that the Arabs were really, really into was the notion of alchemy. Okay, what's that book? The Alchemist, is that the name of that book? Probably a lot of you have read it. If you haven't, you should read it because it's very inspirational. It's a fun and fast read, and it's inspirational. Okay. Anyway, so the one thing that comes up in that is this notion of alchemy, because the whole idea, in its broadest sense, is that the alchemy is to take base metals and turn them into gold. You could somehow do something to these lesser quality metals and you could turn them into something really precious. But the whole notion of alchemy went through everything. Could I go into the kitchen and take very simple ingredients and turn them into something brilliant? Okay, that's sort of the definition of mole, is you're taking all these ingredients and you're turning them into something brilliant. The time when mole apparently was invented, or at least sort of came on the scene, was a time when the fashion was to build these beautiful churches that were Baroque, meaning that they were just ornamented and ornamented. There were ornaments on the ornaments. I mean, it was just, you go into some of these churches and your eye can't land on anything because there's just so much gorgeous gold leaf and carving and all kinds of stonework done and all that. And the idea was that the more ornamentation, the better. And doesn't that describe mole too? It's just got all these flavors in it. So when you start to look at our culture through the lens a cuisine through the lens of its culture and its history and what happened to be there or was brought in, suddenly you start to see things in a different light. And that's what I opened my eyes to when I got to Mexico. And to this very day, I've been doing it for now 120 years or something like that, and and I still, every time I go back to Mexico, I find something brilliant, something I hadn't seen before, and it's partly because the country has been so micro-regional. And so people did it their ways, and they're still continuing the ancestors' ways of doing things. But those things in some cases were just totally brilliant. Nobody knew about them because they were just done in this little village. And so my going back there now is to go back with my eyes wide open all the time and just see what happens to be there. When I graduated from college, I did a degree in Spanish language, literature, and Latin American studies, and then I really wanted to go on and study more culture stuff. So I applied to and got into University of Michigan in their graduate program in anthropology and linguistics. And I wanted to really talk about how a language reflects a culture. And I went through that whole program, and then I was writing my dissertation. I pushed through the program and I was ready to do this. And all of a sudden I realized, my passion, what I was spending all my time thinking about when I was not working on this dissertation, was food and cooking. I had started teaching cooking classes. I had set up a little catering business with a friend of mine. I had started doing all this stuff, and I said, why not just marry my two passions, one for culture and one for food, and really focus on Mexico and its cuisine, but do it how the culture is expressed through the cuisine. So that's what I really focused on after that. And I decided to take a year off from writing the dissertation, which actually turned into my lifetime. And I decided that I wanted to go to Mexico and start working on a book on regional cuisine. And that turned into a 5-year project. At the end of that, moved to Chicago, where my wife's family is. And after we finished our manuscript, had to do something to make a living. And so decided that what I really wanted to do was to go back in the restaurant business, but this time on my terms. But there was nowhere that I could go to school to learn how to make this food in a commercial setting. So I literally had to write my own book. It's like, okay, so-and-so's grandmother taught me to make this dish. Now she made a quart of this sauce over here. Now I got to make 10 gallons. So how am I going to do that? And I was translating the traditional home kitchen into the commercial kitchen. And my goal was to not lose the authentic flavor, the true flavor of what I had been taught to make. It's easy to make this food that we do in a faster way than we do in our restaurants. But from day one, I said that compromises it too much. It'll be like a shadow of what I tasted. And I'm the guy that still to this day goes to Mexico, and every time that I eat a dish that's similar to anything we make on our menu, I close my eyes and see if I can imagine that this is the flavor that I'm getting when I'm sitting in my dining room in my restaurant. That's what I'm looking for. I want to be the guy that is truly representing this incredibly marvelous culture. And I want to do that with great integrity. And I was talking to the chefs over at Beacon Hill just a little bit ago, and I was saying the way that we do our creativity stuff, because we change our menus really frequently in our restaurant, and my role in all of this is to make sure that we are going down the right path, that sort of, you could call it the path of authentic flavor, that we're not veering away. Yes, we do a lot of creative cooking, but it's done within the confines of the traditional kitchen. So if you come to me and you say you want to put Thai red curry paste in the seafood dish that we're doing, I'm probably going to tell you that doesn't belong here. You could say, but I want to make it with some coconut milk, and I want to do this, and I love lemongrass. And I say, but wait a second, no, the people coming through our doors are expecting us to give them something that's going to resonate with the Mexican kitchen. So I said, okay, I can tell you this one thing. Over in the state of Veracruz, they do seafood stews, a lot of times with red chili and coconut. And so that's kind of cool. They do that. Now, it's not going to have lemongrass in it, but if you're kind of moving in your dish in this direction, let's talk about how that dish will come about, or where it comes about in Mexico, and how we can satisfy both what you love and what our customers are expecting here, and what I'm trying to do in this restaurant. So I'm sort of the gatekeeper, and I'm the one that's sort of mentoring everybody as we're going along and we're creating these dishes, and we're trying to be respectful of the cuisine that we work in, and at the same time be doing things that we're passionate about. It's that. But to be a sous chef in our restaurant and know people besides the sous chefs and chefs can create the menu, but to get to that level, you have to prove to me that you can make about 20 dishes that are super classic. And if you can't make those and achieve that really traditional, absolute classic flavor, I'm not going to let you play with it. Because to me, you're trying to build your house on sand rather than a firm foundation, okay? Because to me, the foundation is to be able to create the really traditional stuff perfectly executed. And then you can go on. Then I'll trust you to be more creative after that, because I'll know that you know the framework to go on. And I know a lot of people don't work, and it's gotten to the point right now that in our country, a whole lot of the young chefs are just taking a little of this and taking a little of that and putting it all together. And it can be gloriously good food. And there's a certain, what I call, new style authenticity to that if you happen to be a really good cook, but you can't call it anything but your own personal cuisine. And like I did an event a month or two ago at a restaurant, and this guy said, I'm very heavily influenced by the Mexican kitchen and by the Middle Eastern kitchen. And so and he was making this meal. I was just there doing a demo and talking about things, but he was doing all the food. And I went there, and it was what I would call the completely personal cuisine. It was all just stuff he had made up. And he happened to be a pretty good cook. So there was a delicious meal. We had a nice time and all that. But when he said, no, I'm really heavily influenced by the Mexican kitchen, I wanted to say to him, I didn't because he was my host, but I wanted to say to him, I beg to differ with that. What you've done is pluck a few ingredients out of the Mexican kitchen and put it into dishes that you're just concocting. And I would say at the base of your food here, it's kind of what I would call New American cuisine with a bunch of ingredients, because it's like when you speak a language. It's not just the words, it's the way the words are all put together that makes the sentences, and then the sentences in the paragraphs. That's what makes sense, not just the single words. But this guy was like, he was speaking plain old English, but throwing in words from Mexico and words from the Middle East, and that's the way he got it. But he was really making American food, and I could understand kind of where he was coming from. But for him, he wasn't understanding what he was doing, and why I would differ with him to say he's influenced by Mexico. No, he was just influenced by some Mexican ingredients that he tasted. But if you really want to open your eyes, you have to dig deeper than that. You have to say, in that culture, how are those ingredients put together? How is the dish balanced in flavor? How are they put together, meaning techniques? How are they put together? How are they put together, meaning the balance of how much of something goes onto a plate or into a sauce? What do you serve it with? That will reflect the case. Now you're starting to talk about the Mexican cuisine. But if you don't get that deep into it, then you're only talking about ingredients. And that's where American chefs get a really bad reputation in the rest of the world, because a lot of American chefs never really master anything but the American cuisine, but they say, oh no, I do French food. Oh, I do Italian food. No, but they don't really ever master anything in those cuisines to be able to say, oh, I really understand that cuisine from the inside, and I could cook it. So that's something that I think we all have to be kind of aware of. And maybe some of you in this room will get a real passion for another country's cuisine. And if you do that, then my recommendation is to really do it, okay? Go live there. Really study it from the inside out so that you understand when you serve something and when you don't serve something. Why in Italy do they not drink a cappuccino after 9 o'clock in the morning or whatever, you know? And we drink cappuccinos after a big meal in a fine dining restaurant, you know, that kind of stuff. So really understand it from the inside by delving into it, working in kitchens and all of that sort of thing. That's where you're going to really open your eyes to the full breadth of what that cuisine has to offer. If I hadn't spent 5 years living in Mexico, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do. Not that I'm telling you, you all have to go and spend 5 years, though some of you may want to do that. But I will say that I couldn't do the work that I do unless I had spent the time really mastering the cuisine from the inside out. I've kind of dumped out all this stuff. I haven't done anything about farm to table. So I'll say one thing about farm to table, and that is that when I moved back from Mexico, I had learned a big lesson when I was there, that the best food always came from the places with the best local agriculture. And when I moved to Chicago, there was not a farmer's market there, and there was no farms I could buy from that were coming into, driving into Chicago or anything like that. I said, there's no way we can do great cuisine if we don't have great local agriculture. So I started on that mission. It took me almost 10 years to really get farms that would work with us. We started getting some farmers markets. Now, thankfully, after 30 years of being in the restaurant business there, we have over 60 farmers markets in the city of Chicago, and we have every chef that's worth his salt or her salt is cooking with local ingredients. So it's come a long way. Part of it is because we realized that the farms didn't have all the resources they needed to actually grow to a size that we could buy from them, because we have high volume restaurants, and so we need a lot of product. And so we started lending money to the farms to buy the equipment that they needed to grow. And then we eventually turned that into a not-for-profit organization that we raise money and we distribute that through grants to Midwestern family farms. And we have invested over $2 million in small grants, around $10,000. But it has really changed the face of local agriculture around Chicago to have this enthusiasm about it, and also to invest in those farms to help grow those farms. So that was where I started. I got super into organics, but not because that I was sort of the dyed-in-the-wool liberal that said everything had to be organic, but as opposed to some people in my profession. But I actually learned about organic from the farmers, because all the people that grew organically for us, their stuff came and it was much more beautiful than the people that didn't. And so I said, tell me why this is. It's like, well, because we're not vegetable farmers, we're dirt farmers, and we have to grow really good dirt. And once you put all of that effort into the soil, and then this plant comes up and it gives you this beautiful thing, well, you treat it differently, and you pick it and you put it in the box in a certain way. And so it was the farmers that taught me about organics and got me really into organics. And so all of these things came out of my time in Mexico, and then my knowledge from the farms. And now we're sort of one of the biggest proponents, even though we're high volume at this point in the year. We're right at about 85% all local ingredients in our restaurant. And in the wintertime, a lot of people don't believe this, but we have invested in a lot of farms being able to either have hoop houses where they can keep crops going, or in storage facilities to do all of the storage crops for us. But even in the middle of the winter, we'll be at about 50% local crops on our menu at a time when most people aren't buying anything that's local. But that to me means that our food will have a vibrancy that it couldn't have otherwise. I was just asked the question, so you don't have to ask it, I'll answer it anyway. I was just asked in the last panel that I was on about, pardon me, about the why it's important to buy local. And I drop it into 3 categories, maybe 4. But number 1 is that the stuff is picked ripe. Okay, all that stuff that you get in a grocery store, most of it has traveled something around 2,000 miles. That's the average. Is what you cannot pick something ripe and have it transported 2,000 miles and still have it edible. It will be way past its prime. So number 1, that stuff is picked when it's not quite ripe and then shipped. Number 2, they're choosing only the varieties of that thing that can be shipped. So the stuff that's durable, not tasty, okay? So your local farms can pick it ripe, and they can give you different varieties that perhaps are going to have a better taste and texture. So that's what makes, I cook for flavor and texture, and if I'm going to do that, I'm going to buy the local stuff, okay? There's only so many tricks a good chef can do to bad produce to make it edible, and I know a lot of those tricks. Probably all of you are learning a lot of those tricks, and those are always great tricks to have up your sleeve. But your goal should be to not have to use them, okay? That your product is so good that you don't have to do any tricky stuff to your food to make it taste really, really good. The other thing is that when you're buying locally, then you're supporting your local businesses. It's just healthier for your area. And I love to think that we're buying $3 million a year in our restaurants from small local family farms. That says a lot about what we're doing to create community. And that is one of the things that we focus very heavily on. I'd say above everything, a lot of people go into the restaurant business as a business, okay? There's those people that do that, and that's fine, and they usually open lots of restaurants and they run them in a certain way and all that. That's not what I am interested in or what I do. I have a bunch of restaurants and they've been financially successful, and I'm really happy about all of that. But they've been financially successful because I've kept my eye on what our mission is. And our mission, first and foremost, is to create community. Okay, so, because I think that's what food does. So we create community in 2 places. Just like our farmers create community in 2 places. But in the restaurant, we create community in our dining room. So we are bringing people together around a table. That is one of the most forceful things in a society, okay, is to bring people together around a table. And that's why the thing that erodes it the most is people eating by themselves, eating out of a microwave, because you can do that by yourself easily, going through the drive-through, whatever. That erodes the sense of community and makes people feel like that they're not part of something. But in a restaurant, people sit around a table together. So what we are doing is preserving community or creating community right there. And that's what we get to do every day of our lives. Just think about what an incredible gift that is, that what you do for a profession is to help create community, and you create it by bringing the people together in the restaurant around tables. Second place you create community is in the kitchen and in the front of the house. And those of you that have worked in restaurants know that they're very family-like. It's very physical. You can't serve your guests unless you're all working together as a team. When you're working together as a team, then it feels very family-like. So you're creating community in your kitchens, in your front of the house, hopefully together as one big team, but you all feel like that you're part of the same enterprise going in the same direction. You can't help but feel that because everybody is dependent on everybody else in a kitchen. So you're creating community there, and that's a very, very strong force. Our farmers create community in two places. They create community in the little towns that their farms are in, because if it's all sold off to big agribusiness, there's no community left there. So they're still creating community there, but they're creating community in a farmer's market as well. So if they come to sell in a farmer's market, they're bringing people together in something that's really we're in desperate need of in the United States, and it's not a shopping mall. Okay, just think about a shopping mall is police. First of all, it's all about just selling. Okay, it's just about selling. And it's you go there for to buy your underwear or whatever. So you're there in the shopping mall. If you get out of line, there's a security guard that's going to kick you out. Whatever. Farmers markets are much more egalitarian than that. You can go and wander through them and talk to people. And a lot of the farmers markets have other components like somebody's playing music off in the corner for the kids, and so it becomes more like the old town square. And when I go to the farmers market on Sunday mornings, the people that are there, they'll see me buy kohlrabi to shred and make into a little slaw, and they'll go, "What are you going to do with that?" So all of a sudden, we've got this sense of community going on. I'm sharing with them, and they're telling me what they did with it. Oh, I roasted some of those last week, and I thought they were going to be sweeter than they are. And I said, no, they're kind of a vegetable flavor, So maybe you just think about that, and maybe you saute them and mix them into a pasta dish, And so we can have this conversation that's going on, but that creates community, and that's why I'm always pushing everybody to go to the farmer's market. I'm going to shut up now. So now I want you to tell me what you want me to talk about. Ask questions. Nothing?
Don't be shy.
Come on, I've touched on about 17,000 topics since I sat down here. So there's got to be one thing that you have some question about. Yes, ma'am. Right. So the question was, in our restaurants, you can tell I hate commuting. I opened 3 restaurants next door to each other. So we have Frontera, which is our original, just past its 30th birthday, and it's kind of mid-scale. And it really focuses on the traditional foods of Mexico, some contemporary touches here and there. Next to that is Topolobampo, which is our high-end fine dining restaurant that just won the Beard Award for Best Restaurant in the country. And then next to that is quick service. You stand in line, you order, we bring you your food. That one really focuses on Mexican sandwiches, tortas, and caldos, which are like meal-in-a-bowl soups. And we have a chocolate program where we make Mexican hot chocolate, but we start with the beans that are grown in Mexico, and we grind those, and we make hot chocolate out of that, and then churros, because you can't have chocolate without churros, and so we do that. Those are the focuses of that restaurant. And so all those kitchens are connected. But they have their own separate staffs and their own separate chefs and sous chefs. So they're kind of all separate, but we run one food cost for the whole thing because we get all of the food is received together, stored together, and used together. And then, so we only run one food cost for each. For the whole shebang. But of course, labor's easy. We can divide that up, and we can run a different labor for each one because that's easy to put out there. But we do it. They're really run kind of separate, but it's great for me because if I'm in one, I'm in them all. I can just kind of turn around and I can see what they're prepping for Shoko, the quick service place over there, and I can see it all. We've got kind of outgrown our space, so we have 2 satellite kitchens too that are kind of, I don't see those so easily, and those are in the basements, and they're run sort of separate, but they support the rest of the team.
That's great.
There was another question over here. Somebody raised
Somebody else
their
have
hand.
another?
Come on. Yes. Okay. I can talk a little bit about those. So I've talked to you about the ones on Clark Street and how they're really different from each other. And that's the reason that we could put three together, because they're not stepping on each other's toes. And we very, very thoughtfully created, as we grew, we created them so to be nobody cannibalizes any of the others. And then we opened a place that's in a neighborhood near where I live that is what we wanted to be your best neighborhood Mexican restaurant. So it's a sort of simpler version of what we do at Frontera, which is sort of mid-scale, but still it's a downtown restaurant. And this is more of a neighborhood restaurant, simpler food, lower price point, but sort of still going into the same sauce work, not as complex as what we do on Clark Street, but still certainly will satisfy you. If you like Clark Street and you don't want to get into the downtown hoopla, have like $20 to park and stuff like that, then you can go to the one in the neighborhood and you will be satisfied. But our newest creation is one called Leña Brava. And that one is super exciting to me. There's an emerging cuisine in Mexico in the northern part of Baja. So Baja's that peninsula that is, if you go to San Diego and then right below that is Tijuana and then Ensenada, and that's starts this big peninsula that's 1,000 miles long that's on the west coast of Mexico. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the Sea of Cortez, which is that inland sea there that separates the peninsula from the mainland, is the richest waters on the face of the earth when you're talking about marine life. And so Jacques Cousteau, that famous marine biologist, he gave that area the name of the aquarium to the world, because there's just so much going on there. So it's really a major place for seafood. It's also the place where the major Mexican wine growing region is, Valle de Guadalupe, just inland from Ensenada. And when I started going there were about, I think there were 4 boutique wineries and a few big ones. Now there are 200 boutique wineries. This is 23 years ago. We started going there. Had 200 boutique wineries and all these amazing like boutique hotels, and it's turned into sort of Mexico's equivalent of Napa Valley, that kind of thing. And there's all these chefs that have moved up there to open restaurants. And the thing that ties them together are seafood, open fire cooking, open hearth cooking, international feel, because that part of Mexico has a massive amounts of Italians that settle there, Japanese that settle there for the fishing industry, and Chinese that came to build railroads ages and ages ago, back in the late 1800s. So that is the place in Mexico where there's soy sauce in every table. And they make things that are called, the main salsa is called salsa macha. If you've ever bought that chili oil stuff in an Asian grocery store, it looks like that, but with Mexican chilies in it and usually nuts or seeds in it as well. So it's kind of interesting take on it. But that's on every table. So it doesn't really relate to the cuisine of Central and Southern Mexico that I'm most partial to, but very heavily influenced by all the gorgeous seafood that's there. This open hearth cooking, sort of elements from these other cuisines that have, from the immigrants that settled in that part of Mexico, and they're not cooking from the same traditions as Central and Southern Mexico. So it's very exciting. So we opened a restaurant that focuses on that style of cooking, as well as on these amazing Mexican wines that are coming out of that area. So that one's called Leña Brava. And you walk into the dining room, it's 22 feet of hearth. Those of you that have worked in restaurants will really appreciate this. It's 22 feet of hearth in a huge wood-burning oven, and that is the kitchen. So if you want to boil water, the first thing you have to do is light a fire. Okay? There's no gas hookup in there. There's no fryer, because fryers are all powered by gas or electric, and so it's a very different approach to cuisine. So it's a fun place because you are like the kitchen is in the dining room. So a lot of raw dishes because that makes sense in a place like that. So ceviches and aguachiles and seafood cocktails and stuff like that, and then all these glorious dishes that come off these wood fires. So it's got on that 22 feet of hearth. There's six fires burning. So it's quite the amazing place to work, if you could imagine that. It's all night long. I grew up in barbecue. It's all about live fire cooking, and this has been a dream of mine my whole life, is to have an all wood-fired kitchen. But man, when you watch the people that cook that hotline, you talk about skill as a chef. You not only have to think about your food, but you have to moment by moment understand your fire. So when are you going to stoke it? Where is it hottest right now? If I put like we do these big splayed fish open that are cooked over the wood fire, and if it's not evenly evenly hot, then that basket is going to stick to the fish in the place that's not quite hot enough. And so you have to understand your fire intimately. And all the cooks will always tell you about the first 3 weeks that they're there. It's mind-boggling to them because they can't ever figure out. It's like, I'm used to just turning the knob, and when it hits this place, then I got my fire. It's all I need to know, right? No, this one, you are constantly stoking, moving, all this sort of stuff. And I was talking to one of the chefs in Baja a couple of weeks ago, and we were sitting, I did an event down there, so I had a couple of my chefs with me, and we were sitting right across from his big wood fire. And at one point, he reached in his bed of coals, he pulled it out, and then he pushed it all back in. And I said, I'm not sure why you did that. And he goes, so it's because, it's like I have this little bit of ash over that whole bed of coals. And I was feeling it over here that I needed to get that evened out. And so I spread out my fire and I put it back in. Now, if you think about when you're cooking in a kitchen, and if you have to think at that level of detail about your heat source, it makes you have a very different perspective on what it means to be a cook. And so I love that. It's been a really, it's about 1.5 years old now. And it's been a really wonderful project. What made me choose Chicago? Number one, I wanted to settle someplace that we had family, and Deanne my wife grew up in Chicago, and I liked it as a city. It was, New York is a lot to work with, and I didn't have a lot of good friends in New York, and I wasn't sure I wanted to start at the bottom and work my way up. San Francisco was the mecca for when we opened Frontera, but I went out there and visited, and I don't know, it just felt like it was the gourmet ghetto. It was like every other place, every other storefront was a restaurant doing. I just thought, I don't know if I really want to compete with that. And since my wife grew up in Chicago, I said, let's try living in Chicago. Well, it was perfect for me. I love the Midwest sensibility. It's much more down to earth. We had been doing some consulting work in Los Angeles, and I knew that wasn't right for me because you had to close your restaurant and reinvent it every few years because they were always looking for the hot new thing. And so I loved Chicago because I could look around and I could say, that restaurant's been there for 20 years, that one's been there for 30 years. And I knew that if you continued to give a good product at a reasonable price, that you could be in business for the rest of your life. And I grew up in a restaurant that was there for 37 years, and I wanted that stability in my life. And I loved that. Second thing was that Chicago has the second largest concentration of Mexican immigrants in the United States. And that meant that I could get all the crazy ingredients that I wanted to get that in other places just weren't available. Even we had been living in LA part-time, And back then, that's changed now, but back then it was hard to find a lot of the ingredients in LA because it was more of a Chicano population, people that had been multi-generations there, and so they had kind of learned to do without the stuff that the grandparents said that they needed. But that wasn't the case in Chicago. And I knew I would have a really great availability of ingredients, and it's been perfect for me. I love it there.
Could you, if, is there one chef out there that you could say wows you as a chef when you go and dine at their establishment or their restaurant? If you could pick one of today's chefs.
I don't do well with that question. There's different aspects of so many people that I like to focus on. Alex Stupak in New York is doing Mexican food. He started with Empellón Taqueria and then opened Empellón Cocina. That's closed now, but then he moved up Midtown in New York City and he opened this place that's just called Empellón, I think. But anyway, I went there and I think, this is a guy who started off at Alinea. He's really smart. He started off as a pastry chef at Alinea in Chicago, and he was really the only pastry chef that restaurant has ever had. Then he went to work with Wiley Dufresne at Deputy 50 in New York, and he was pastry chef there, and just like crazy, modernist, brilliant thing. But his heart kept telling him all he wanted to eat was Mexican food, and so he and his wife decided to open their own place and to make it be Mexican. But I've thought that his background hadn't really focused all the stuff that he could do until he opened this place in Midtown. And it's really great. Follow him on Instagram, Alex Stupak. You'll see what kind of really cool stuff that he's doing right now. And I'm really wowed by that. I find that a great challenge. There's a whole bunch of chefs in Mexico that are really thinking outside the box. When we first started doing our research in Mexico, there were no known chefs in Mexico. I mean, they were always nameless and behind the scenes in the kitchens. And if you wanted the really good food of Mexico, you would go to a restaurant that didn't have a chef, that had a mayora. So the mayora is the woman who's come up through the ranks, and she becomes the keeper of tradition. And she knows how to make everything, and she passes it on. She's the mentor to the next generation. And so I learned everything I know basically from mayoras, because the whole notion of a chef that's trained, that it goes out there and does something that is a unique vision, was just not known in Mexico. Now that's all changed, and there's amazing chefs in Mexico. If you want to go someplace, go to Oaxaca. They're amazing, or Mexico City too. There's amazing.
One more
chefs.
question, thanks.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
There's two of you together, both of you.
Go ahead.
Go. Yes, we take interns all the time. Yes, we do. That's a harder one. Let's see who. That's a harder one. I will leave the person's contact information that you would get in touch with right now. Yeah, it's this one chef in our organization that handles all the interns. Yes, but we do that. Yes, we take interns all the time. And did you have a question, sir? When they're leaving school, well, it'd be the same piece of advice, I think, if I understand the question right. But I will tell you that the thing that I always tell everybody is kind of where I started today, that thing about dailiness, okay? So that ties in very clearly to the fact that what we do is a craft. Don't ever lose sight of the fact that this is a craft. And you will be perfecting your craft for the rest of your life. You will never learn it all, and you will never get it exactly right. You should have such incredibly high standards, and you should almost always let yourself down. I mean, you should like try, you want to make this thing absolutely perfect. And God, I got like 90% today. I got 95% there, but I can still imagine how it can be just that little bit better. And I want to get that someday. I want to get to that. And if you keep raising your own bar, it's not a competition with other people, it's a competition with yourself. Okay? So keep setting your own bar higher, but remember, it's a craft. You only perfect your craft by doing it. So it's like sometimes young chefs will come into our organization and we only cook over wood fires in all of our restaurants, and if for the grill part of it, and they'll say, it's like, tell me the tricks to grilling a good steak. And I say, oh, no, wait. Okay. You will come back to me when you've cooked 100 steaks and tell me what that piece of meat is telling you it needs. Okay. Once you get there, that tells me you're not forcing anything on the product. You're listening to the product and you are making it the best that it can be, because it will tell you what it wants. And then you will learn by doing. That's what it means to be a good craftsman. I could say, well, I put it over this part of the fire and I let it sit for 30 seconds, and then I flip it over, and that's not cooking. That's paint by numbers. Is there ever a great chef that comes out of paint by numbers? No. It's only about communing with the product, and in our case, also communing with the fire, knowing what the temperature is and what works. And we have this one guy on our staff who has cooked our grill at Frontera for almost 20 years. Okay, we always say about this guy, he could grill mark a stick of butter and hand it back to you, and it would be perfect. And he could never tell you one thing that he does. If you ask him to say, teach me about grilling, he'd say, you just grill. And he's just like, he is the most brilliant grill cook I have ever seen in my life. You can hand him anything and he can grill it. But it's not because he learned it by somebody writing it down on a piece of paper and he memorized it. No, he just learned it by just doing it. And when you watch him, he is so in his groove. He's in his groove all night. He hardly ever says a word to anyone. He's not the one that runs the flow of that line. And that line last Saturday night did 400 guests, okay? And it's a five-person line, and it's in the bulk of the entrees he has cooked, okay? So this guy's just a magician. But if you watch him in the flow of service, his body is totally relaxed, and he is just in the groove. He's not, you couldn't break into it, He's watching the tickets, and the guy to his left is the guy he's watching what's on the grill, and he's going, okay, this ticket next, and he'll organize it, and then they'll put all of that up, and this guy's just watching the flow, and he hardly ever says anything, and he's just like, it's like watching the most beautiful dancer you've ever watched, in what he is as a grill cook. And that, to me, is what we should all strive for. And sometimes it's hard because we come out of education where we learn stuff from books, but sometimes we just have to go back and say, no, it's a craft. I actually have to learn it in my fingers more than in my head.
Okay, last question, Shaka wanted.
You have to speak up.
How do you keep your momentum after working for so long and being in this business for so long? How do you keep going? How do you keep yourself motivated?
I don't have to work at it. It just comes natural for me. I love this business. I'm such a lucky person to have gotten into something that if I hadn't done it for a vocation, I would have done it for an avocation. I would have done this for fun. And it's like I get to do for my work what I would do for fun. So yeah, I always said this. Somebody said this to me one time, and it really struck home. That every profession has its bedpans. Okay, so if you work in a hospital, somebody's got to clean those bedpans. Okay, you may think that you're taking care of people who are in great need, but somebody's still got to clean out the bedpans. Okay, that's part of the job. And in the kitchen, it's the same thing. There's going to be that stuff that's just the crap you don't want to deal with, okay? But you still have to do it to get to do the stuff that you want to do. So I don't mind that. I mean, one of the jobs that I have is like a human resources person. You know, I got to help find all the chefs that we need. And do I like it? No, I hate it. It's like the least interesting part of my job. I wish I never had to do it, but somebody's got to do it, so I got to do it. And then that gives me the opportunity to do the rest of the stuff that I love. But there's a great American poet, Mary Oliver, who wrote the simplest poem that I think is really important in our field. It says, "A lesson on living a life. Pay attention, be amazed, tell about it." Okay? So, the way that translates into my life is I walk through the kitchen and one of the farmers has just brought in these amazing peaches that just, they greet you with their aroma like that. So I stop and I pay attention to them. I smell them. I'm amazed about them. I go and get another cook and say, "Come over here." I'm telling about it. To me, it's about paying attention and then doing something with that. And I think that there's so much great stuff around us. And I know that sometimes we get bogged down, political climate, this has gone wrong, family matters, whatever it might be. But we have to stop and pay attention, be amazed at what we see, and then tell somebody about it. And then suddenly it all gets to be much better. So that's the way I stay involved.
Thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause for...
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Chef Rick Bayless, Tim England. Thank you. This wraps up today's session. For you, we still have some ways to go this evening, right?
Yes.
Thank you again for coming, and hopefully it was a great experience for all of you as much as it was for myself, Chef Bob, Tim.